would you look at the time? So, in addition to being a far-right oligarch functionally usurping the US government and trying to stick his nose into elections across Europe, haha, get me out of this timeline, Elon's got himself into a spot of trouble with the gamers he's trying oh so hard to seem cool to, after a streaming incident where he basically outed himself as someone who bought his way into the top of Path of Exile 2's hardcore leaderboards. Allegedly, of course. I don't know that much about Path of Exile, so I mostly have to take the word of the experts on the matter, but I'm totally willing to buy that Elon sucks at a build-based action RPG, because he's made a build for my favorite build-based action RPG, Elden Ring, and oh boy. Now, I'm not the first to call Elon Musk's build bad, not by a long shot. The dude's build has become a subject of mockery to the point where people make challenge runs based off of it. Like, if your build sucks so bad that using it qualifies as a challenge run, just reconsider yourself. But there aren't as many people breaking down the nitty-gritty of why it's bad, and that's what I wanted to do. To give an idea why a lot of experienced Elden Ring players are turning their nose up at Elon Musk's attempt at a Spellblade ? What are my qualifications for this kind of video? Well, I'm not terrible at int melee builds. I have a moderate understanding of how to use a medium variety of spells, so to speak. I'm not a god gamer, mind you. Most of this b-roll is going to be me losing to Melania, and I'll happily showcase it because some of us can take our L's with grace and dignity. Mostly. The mountaintop catacombs are quarterly invited to gargle a hot one. But I know the ropes, and more importantly, I have a strong grasp of game knowledge, which is the #1 tool to getting good in Elden Ring, so I feel comfortable breaking down the flaws in this build. Besides, it's rare I get to dunk on someone so thoroughly without feeling at least a little bit of guilt about it, and this will be good for me. Very little, in truth. That, I think, is a huge and somewhat understated part of the criticisms of the build. Sure, it's got its flaws, but there are flawed builds with nevertheless very strong niches. But frankly, this build just doesn't have any real positives to highlight. The Turtle Talisman is admittedly pretty universally useful. It's functionally impossible to make a build where stamina regen is a bad thing. And he had Oleg on his bar. Oleg is literally the best thing about this build. I might be an Ingval truther because I love my tanky mans, but Oleg stands right alongside his brother as one of the best pre-DLC summons in the game. I guarantee you, if Oleg weren't here to carry Elon and tank all the shit that should be two-shotting him at this point, he would not have made it to mountaintops with this travesty. Make no mistake, this is Oleg's build and Elon's just living in it. Also, at least he is trying to specialize into a certain weapon stat instead of trying to jack of all trades it, which is the other big newbie mistake I see. That is a positive. So that's what this build does well. What does it do less well? A lot, actually. Elon's build is deep into heavy roll. It's barely a pound away from overloaded. Now, this isn't inherently the worst thing in the world. For the first few weeks of the DLC, the best chance of beating Promised Consort was to dress yourself in 60 pounds of brickware, equip a wall for a shield, and turtle up. A slow and steady tank can be done in this game. The problem is that none of anything else Elon does is built for being a turtle. And nothing exemplifies that more than that goddamn sword seal on his talisman pouch. For those who don't know, Radagon's sword seal gives the wearer an extra 5 points in vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity. A free extra 20 levels sounds great, especially in health and endurance and for meeting the requirements for half his kit, but these levels aren't free. Wearing Radagon Seal leads to a hefty 15% increase to all damage taken. You will note, of course, that if you're building for a slow and tanky build, the only build that justifies that equip load, an extra 15% damage taken is, counterproductive, which means that Elon is taking on all the burdens of chunky armor and getting comparable damage negation to what I get with literally half the equip load. Seriously, how do you end up with sub 20 anything defense-wise while wearing General Radagon's armor? I'm not even a fan of big tanky armor sets, and I feel offended on this set's behalf. Look how you massacred somebody else's boy. Oh, but wait, you say. He also has the Crimson Amber Medallion +1, which boosts his hit points by another 7%. That brings him up to 1,109 hit points, which is really good for only 26 base vigor. Wait, if he's supposed to have that much, where do those extra 100 hit points go? Surprise extra problem! That Twin Sage Helm gives a +6 to intelligence, which actually would go pretty far with Lusat's bonkers-ass scaling, but at the cost of a whopping 9% cut to HP, which, if you understand your numbers, you will know is more than 7%. He's also losing 9% of his stamina, which will go great for him when he needs to block with those shields because he can't fucking dodge fast enough. And he doesn't even need that extra 6 int. His base stats are more than enough to wield Lusats by this point, and he'll get enough levels between mountaintops and endgame to make up the difference without shooting himself in the foot. So yes, technically with all his shit tossed together, he has 200 more HP than he would otherwise have with his base stats, as well as the ability to hit the base strength requirement for Moonveil. Unfortunately for his dumbass, he's also taking 15% more damage for it, and in the mountaintops that shit hurts. This chart posted on Reddit by a now deleted user shows that enemies in the mountaintops of the giants are scaled to deal about 3.5 times as much damage as their base stats, and the enemies in mountaintops aren't all Godric soldiers and dogs. I have literally twice as much vigor as Elon has, and this Deathrite bird just does not give a solitary fuck. And to be clear, this isn't strictly a long-range build that just comments and runs. This is ostensibly a spell sword build. He intends on getting pretty up close, which means that the damage increase and relatively lowish vigor are going to end up fucking him over in ways they don't need to. His base stats on their own aren't the worst, though he could stand to cut some of mine over to health and be largely fine. I made it to mountaintops with 25 mind and barely had to touch my blues. But he's kneecapping himself unnecessarily for band-aid solutions that end up compounding the problem. Just ditch the Soar Seal and level up to Moonveil's requirements. It doesn't help that 26 base vigor by mountaintops is kinda pathetic anyway. On my Magic Knight build, I had 30 vigor by Renala. I had well on my way to 50 by the time of the mountaintops, and my weapon of choice had actual strength requirements I needed to build into. You'd think a god gamer would understand the importance of level grinding.
But why is vigor so important, anyway? Why is the health bar such a big deal?
Because the longer you can stay in a boss arena before dying, the more damage you can do and the likelier you can kill the boss. The more health you have, the more hits you can take. The more hits you can take, the longer you stay in the boss arena. See the cycle of logic here? Having solid vigor means that you can survive, say, dumbass risks like this, and survive long enough to heal up and kill the boss. And you can't say, oh lol, you don't need defense if you just don't get hit, because he's wearing high defense heavy armor and 2 shields. This build is literally a pound away from overloaded. It's not built to avoid damage. It's built to soak damage, and it's bad at it. No, seriously, what is Roger's giving you here? Look, I'm one of the 5 int Dex players who's never touched Moonveil, and I'll die on my anti-meta hill, but I do recognize why it's meta. Accessible ranged and melee damage, a weapon skill with multiple hitboxes, innate bleed. Int Dex builds eat like kings, and Moonveil is the roast pig at the banquet. And on Elon's build specifically, with the tools available pre-mountaintops, Moonveil has an attack rating of 70 more than Roger's Rapier, even though Roger's Rapier has arguably better scaling suited for Elon's int pump.
Yes, but it's important to note that different weapons have different damage types. Pierce and slash damage affect different enemies differently.
Yeah, thrusting swords are pretty valuable for their access to pierce damage, physical damage type which is more useful than slash damage against major bosses like Radon, Magma Worm Makar, Elmer of the Prior, the Draconic Tree Sentinel, Godfrey's First Phase, Rolana, the Dancing Lion, and so on and so forth. It's a valuable tool in the box. A counter to your counterpoint, though. Katanas also have access to pierce damage, so it is also a redundant tool in the box.
Fair enough. But what about stance damage differences and Ashes of War?
Indeed. Roger's Rapier comes preloaded with Glintblade Phalanx, an absolutely phenomenal Ash of War that I use in my own Spellblade build. This skill on a thrusting sword does a total of 37 stance damage, which is way more than Transient Moonlight's 30, right? Well, there's varying returns on stance damage. Bosses have different stance bars, but the average is around 120. Barring stance damage decay, it will take 4 hits from Moonveil's Ash of War to stance break, while Roger's Rapier with Glintblade Phalanx will take also 4 hits. Phalanx does take less hits to proc stance break once you reach stance values past 120, but those are fairly rare. Of the pre-DLC achievement bosses, only Starscourge Radon, Lich Dragon Fortisax, and Dragon Lord Placidusax have high enough stance. And I don't know how much I should count Radon given the gimmick of his fight. Like, yeah, he's got 200 stance, but you have a Blythe. One could make a cogent counterpoint that having more stance damage is beneficial to counter stance decay, and that different weapon schools have different stance damages baked into their attacks anyway. The first one does make a decent point, but as for the second, well, katana movesets do more stance damage than thrusting sword movesets anyway. Yeah, bloody heelless this ain't. Sorry, Roger. Not to mention, as much as I'm a Glintblade truther, it's way easier to get the full stance damage from just transient moonlighting an enemy at close range than it is to get the full stance damage from Glintblade, which requires an immediate follow-up that is easier to whiff than you might think. Also, you can just take Glintblade Phalanx off of Roger's and put it on a better weapon. The two aren't married. The best part of the sword and its sole purpose is getting moved from the sword onto a better weapon. With all the numbers added together, it's hard to deny that Roger's Rapier feels like literal dead weight on this build. So, the player character starts with 2 memory slots by default. You can obtain all 8 memory slots before reaching the mountaintops. 1 at the Twin Maiden's Husk, 1 in Weeping Peninsula, 4 in Liurnia, 1 in Mount Gelmir, and 1 in Dragon Barrow. You can also use Moon of Noxtella to get an extra 2, but we've already been over Elon's talismans. Now, you'll notice that Elon does not have 10 spell slots. The Twin Sage Helmet is only accessible after killing the Red Wolf, so he's definitely got that memory stone. We can also assume he's got the one from the Twin Maidens, since that's literally right there. Meaning that Elon Musk, for his fucking caster build, got 1 memory stone that the game didn't literally just hand to him.
Do you need all spell slots for a Spell Knight build? You used like 1 spell against Malenia.
It takes like 20 minutes to clear the tower puzzles, the hardest to find memory stone is behind a demi-human queen, and there's no downside to having them. And like, He's got loose sats. There's a memory stone literally right next door in Celia.
Maybe that's the one he is.
It takes like 30 seconds to launch yourself up the spirit spring next to the shopkeep in the Weeping Peninsula and find the damn tower turtles. Celivis has one in his fucking tower. Not even sealed or anything. You just hang a left after Loretta, walk past the creep, and climb up a ladder. Bam! Free spell slot. Also, if your build spell slots are such a precious fucking rarity, why do you have Night Comet and Comet? You have loose sats, meaning you went to Celia. Go grab the Staff of Loss, left hand that instead of your goddamn 2 shields, and just use Night Comet. Its utility is so much better. Wait, how many shields? Why? Why 2 shields? No. Why 2 medium shields? You can't make the argument that one of them's a parry shield and one of them's a turtle shield. They're the exact same size. Neither of them even has parry equipped.
Maybe it's for the different elemental negations. Please stop making me play devil's advocate for this terrible man.
Shh, don't worry, that's your last line. The only thing Carrion's Knights does better than the brass shield is magic resistance. It's worse for every other element, they have the exact same physical resistances, and there's no enemy pre-DLC that uses both magic and another elemental damage separately. Also, that kind of playstyle demands a lot more in the endurance and equip weight fields, like running to get the Great Jar's arsenal demands. Again, he's trying to tank with no tank tools. So what would be a better build for a decently tanky spell sword by level 111? Well, if you want a basic bitch ego-stroking answer, here's what my int melee build looked like at level 111. You'll notice the chunkier health bar, the headpiece that doesn't tank my health pool, talismans catering to the actual tools at my disposal, a more efficient toolbar, and oh hey, look at that, I've actually got all the memory stones. And it still does a pretty good job of mulching enemies even with lower combat stats and no loose sats. Funny how building like you know what you're doing gives good results. Also, my drip game is just objectively superior because I didn't slap a Burger King helm onto General Radon's armor. But instead of just pointing at my homework and going, "Get good, you fascist fuck," let's entertain the question of what to do in a way that allows this build to keep some of its benefits while shedding some of its downsides. First off, this is a new baseline stat allocation. We have way more HP to work with without having to rely on Radagon's Source Seal, and 28 Mind will still get you pretty far on a 10-4 Crimson Cerulean Flask but at this level, especially with some boosts we add down the line. For talismans, I focused only on ones I could get before mountaintops, since that's where this screenshot was seemingly taken. I chose Erdtree's Favor +1 from Moog the Omen's Boss Room, the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman +1 from the Sainted Hero's Grave, the Carian Filigree Crest from Ichi, and Cerulean Amber Medallion 2 from Moonlight Altar. This gives us bonus health, stamina, and carry weight without having to Source Seal's damage crutch, gives us a tanky physical boost to bring us up to the Lion Armor's defenses without heavy rolling, reducing Transient Moonlight's FP cost in what's already a pretty FP hungry build, and, in the same vein, a chonky boost to FP for a total baseline of 180. We do lose the 4% boost to sorcery damage the Graven School brings, but, we're still maining loose sats. 300 scaling at 60 intelligence can carry itself. If you really want the extra damage, or you're certain you're going to be backlining for the fight, you can absolutely swap out Dragon Crest for Graven School. I'm not your dad. The use of Dragon Crest was mostly just to make a point about the inefficiency of Elon's build. I mean, hell, my armor loadout for this build without the Dragon Crest is tankier than Elon's line armor thanks to his ass using the Sword Seal late game. Dragon Crest is basically me doing a victory lap at that point. Weapon-wise, I cut Roger's rapier and the brass shield. Despite having worse elemental resistances than anything non-magic, the Carrion Knight Shield still has 100% physical negation and is more accessible to an int build without carving even more out of int in mind. And the rapier pairs enough in comparison to the Moonveil that losing it doesn't lose much. The armor was the most difficult part. I'm pretty sure Elon just slapped Radon's armor on because it looks cool and gives good poise, but it has the downside of both being a very heavy armor set and looking absolutely ridiculous with that Burger King helmet. My goal was to maintain its primary benefit of good poise and decent-ish defenses while knocking the player down to medium roll. Though, in the interest of fairness, Patch 1.07 came out after the screenshot and boosted the poise of all armor by a fair bit. Elon's build has 67 poise nowadays, so I will concede to being at a bit of a building advantage here. Given I only had 20 endurance to work with, this was difficult and I'm still not entirely satisfied with the drip factor, but I managed to put together the Carrion Knight helm, the Cuckoo Knight armor, Cuckoo Knight gauntlets, and Blythe's greaves for a set that reaches the benchmark and stays in medium roll, though just barely. It's not the best looking gear, but it keeps the poise benchmark without weighing the player down. And hey, the defenses are pretty decent without the Sword Seal weighing everything down. It also primarily maintains the vibe of being a magic knight in Elden Ring's world, which is nice. For the Great Rune, I slapped Godric's on for use in boss battles. It's basically the Sword Seal, but infinitely better. I know that Godric's Rune falls off in usefulness in higher levels, but given our limited toolset, having a free 40 levels across our stats right now doesn't hurt by a long shot, and Lusat scaling is good enough for 5 levels to mean a fair bit. And look, we're finally at the first Verisoft cap. I topped off the build with the Magic Shrouding Cracked tier and the Stone Barbed Cracked tier in the Physic. Magic Shrouding gets a hefty boost to magic damage, which this build is primarily reliant on, while the Stone Barbed Cracked tier provides a 30% boost to stance damage. Both are available pre-mountaintops. There are a couple downsides. Status defenses are a fair bit lower, Moonveil has 20 fewer AR, and Lusat scaling is significantly lower at the same Smithing Stone level. But popping a Rune Arc and drinking the Physic will clear most of those gaps pretty easily. Boosting both will also get HP up to 1500 and FP up to 209, both of which are pretty chonky for the levels we're working with. And, going from 610 AR to 590 AR is not that big of a deal. I was only rocking 537 AR on my build at this level, and I was still blendering enemies. You can prioritize your survivability soft caps over doing the big damage, and still deal good numbers, I promise. I also tweaked the Smithing Stone levels down to what was accessible before mountaintops. There are 2 Somber 9s before you get the Roll Medallion, so both Lusats and Moonveil can be at +9 by this point, and you have access to 8 Smithing Stone 8s before then as well, so you can get a default weapon up to +23. Again, not the ideal spell sword build, and there are definitely some places where it could use some focus in further levels, but for where it's at, it's much more efficient at doing what needs doing than Elon's build, and I think that's the big issue here. If I can give one piece of genuine advice to folks watching this, it is this. It is not enough to know that something is a good dex int weapon or a popular talisman in RL1 runs. You have to know why. Moonveil is not good because it is good. It's good because it comes with an Ash of War with 2 hitboxes, one for the sword and one for the projectile, meaning you can either safely use it as a ranged caster stick, Or you can position yourself up an enemy's ass and give him a stance-munching 1-2. Additionally, like most katanas, it comes with bleed damage, so it's pretty solid against anything that can be bled, which is a lot of things. Like, this footage is my first time picking up any katana, much less Moonveil, and I'm still doing bonkers good damage with it. Roger's rapier is not a good weapon on its own. In fact, when plugging Elon's stats into a damage calc, a magic-infused Roger's is actually weaker than the S-stock he would have started out with by a few AR. Its range is pretty middle of the road as well. What makes Roger's rapier a thing you want to get if you're running a melee intelligence build is that getting this sword from Roger is how you get the Glintblade Phalanx Ash of War, an absolute stance-munching dick swinger of an Ash of War that, when put on a weapon with some goddamn tits, will absolutely fuck up an enemy's day, especially when paired with magic shrouding and stonebarb. Radagon's Sword Seal is not a well-known and oft-used talisman because it is good, it's extremely useful conditionally. In RL1 runs, where you start as the Wretch and don't level your character, the extra 20 levels into broadly defensive stats will absolutely be a benefit. And if you're running an RL1 build, you're expecting to get bodied by the mountaintops anyways. It is not a recommended talisman for a 100 plus level spell tank. Building for Elden Ring is a bit more intricate than just slapping together whatever Google tells you is best in SWAT, and numerical efficiency is often the name of the game. Knowing more about scaling, soft caps, and benchmarks will allow you to fine-tune your build to get the most out of every level spent, and that's really where Elon's build fails the most. It's not an unusably bad build, all builds in Elden Ring are technically usable, but it's deeply inefficient for what it wants to do. It's too frail to be a face tank, too heavy to be a no-hitter, not spell-focused enough to be an archmage, but too mage-focused to be a melee bully. This build is just a little too bad at everything. And on a surface level, that's not inherently a bad thing. Most first-time Elden Ring players are not gonna build super efficiently. I didn't. The game doesn't teach you what soft caps are. It's fine. If you can make it to the end, your build is probably fine. If Elon had nutted up and admitted, I'm just starting out myself, learning the systems as I go, people probably wouldn't have gotten on his ass about it as much. The problem is that Elon does not position himself as a casual or hobbyist gamer who would make these kinds of mistakes, because that would mean his narcissistic man-baby ass would have to acknowledge that he wasn't a genius at something, and we can't have that, can we? No, Elon wants us to think that he's a top-tier, hardcore Path of Exile 2 gamer, the elite of the elite in a game that requires a lot more buildcraft and intricate game knowledge than Elden Ring. But when shown the evidence of his own work, it just doesn't line up, and the cracks in his facade are all the more flagrant for it. And that, I think, more than anything, is why people give Elon Musk so much shit for his Elden Ring build. Also, because he's just a shit person in every other capacity and doesn't deserve the slightest bit of grace or dignity in literally anything he does.
Extraordinary. The mark of a true lord.
Now that's how you run a spell sword, motherfucker. Hello there. I actually for once recorded this around the same time I recorded another video, the Avowed video, which y'all should have out by now, but I'm actually still in the process of editing as I write this. So, Hopefully that will indicate maybe me being a little better about efficiently putting together projects since I've got multiple scripts running. Or maybe it won't, who knows. Yeah, this was just kind of something I wanted to do. I've been wanting to do it since the whole Path of Exile 2 thing came out. And, you know, it is always morally correct to dunk on Elon Musk, so guilt-free bullying, that's what this is. I do kind of want to pivot a bit more into like game theorying and build crafting a little bit since that's something I really enjoy doing. I'll still be thinking about like writing parts of games and stuff. This is just also a thing I want to do. In the meantime, while I figure that out, I have been Hex and I will see y'all later. Bye. Not to mention, as much as I'm a glintblade truther, it's way easier to get the full stance damage from just transient moonlighting and enemy. Ugh.